Hello there, what is going on everyone? Today we're going to be doing another Star Wars Armada ship breakdown, and we are talking about the Imperial Light Carrier, otherwise known as the Quasar Fire. This thing is the ultimate carrier in Star Wars Armada, the best ship to get those squadrons activated, to get those TIE fighters into battle, to keep them efficient, and to keep them organized. This is the ship you want. It is absolutely fantastic. We're going to be talking about this ship, the two variants that come with it, the different titles that are available, how it flies, how it runs, and some sample builds and ways that you might find yourself using it in games of Star Wars Armada. If you guys are new here to the channel, we do a lot of Star Wars Armada as well as other Star Wars tabletop gaming content. If you're interested in more, I'm going to have links at the end of the video. Also, the social media links and Crabbok.com and our Discord, which is a great place to kind of dig deeper, ask more questions, learn more, and share your stories, photos, lists, builds, suggestions, and interact with the community in a very family-friendly environment. All that stuff is down in the video description below. Also, we are still doing a $25 Amazon gift card giveaway. If you want to have a chance to enter to win that, you just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. It's as simple as that. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the Quasar. This comes in two different varieties, a Quasar Fire 1 and a Quasar Fire 2. They're both cruiser carriers. This is a medium ship for the Empire. And while we do see this ship used a lot in Star Wars Rebels as as the carrier and Phoenix Home version of this, or Phoenix Nest, it's not currently available to the Rebels. Although I think, in the future, perhaps we could see a version of this that is available to the Rebels. I think that would be a really cool thing. Maybe that's something we might see in a rapid reinforcements type of kind of a product for the game. It's always possible. And for those of you who are Rebel players that really want to run this, I suggest taking the model and still using it with a Rebel Assault Frigate Mark II, which is also a pretty competent Rebel carrier. And this way you can kind of headcanon it in there and just use the model for the Quasar Fire 2 as is still a medium ship on the Assault Frigate Mark II for some of your home games and for your fun scenarios. That's a kind of a good option. But since it is not available for the Rebels, we're going to be talking about it as it applies to the Empire today. Now, this is a fairly cheap medium ship that happens to be the greatest carrier this game has ever seen, in my humble opinion. And what I mean by that, it just has the best stats, the best numbers for pushing squadrons and doing so very efficiently. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So it's a 4 Squadron Value ship. Both versions also have 2 command and 2 engineering, and they only have 2 defense tokens. At 6 hull, which is, again, it is still a medium ship, so it's not the most defensible ship, right? This is a ship that can go pop fairly quickly. If your opponent decides they want to kill your Quasar, they're probably going to be able to kill your Quasar. They might not do it in a single shot. They may not even do it in a single round, but at least with 2 rounds of fire, it is probably going down. But the brace is going to help it do that, and then the 6 hull is going to help it stay alive. The brace and the 6 hull, and now it's got a redirect. The redirect isn't going to help that much because you've only got 2 shields in the front, 2 shields in the sides, and only 1 shield in the rear. So you really have pretty much just 2 shields, maybe 4 shields, and a brace before you're done. So you're really kind of hoping to kill the opponent before they kill you, and that's one of the things that the Quasar is trying to do. And hopefully its brace, limited shield capacity, and respectable hull value of 6 can keep it alive just long enough to do that. Now, one of the things that also is allowing this ship to kind of function a little bit better than some other larger ships is that it can go speed 3. It's fairly mobile, and it has great upgrade slots that are going to allow it to do a lot of really good things with your squadrons. And it pretty much only functions as a carrier. A lot of ships have kind of multiple different ways that they can work. And this one is generally always going to be used in a squadron heavy list. You generally won't use this one in a non-squadron list, although there are some theoretical silly builds out there because it is a medium ship and it does have a lot of hull for its point cost. That you can potentially, if you're trying to see how much hull you can fit into a list, there are some builds that use a whole lot of Quasar Fire 1 ships because they are so inexpensive for a medium ship with 6 hull and a brace token that there's some weird builds that do that, but I don't really suggest that for most people. That's more edge of sanity type of builds that we're really not going to focus on in this video. Now let's talk a little bit more about the structure of the Quasar, because in addition to being a medium ship and being an excellent carrier that is moderately fragile, it also has a very, very large front arc. Now, while most of its dice are in the front, it has 3 dice in the front, 2 dice in the sides, and only 1 die in the rear. Its front arc is massive. It's almost a 50% full front arc. Now, that is interesting in a lot of ways. There's certain ways that you can take advantage of that and making sure that you get your front arc shot, but at the same time, it means you're not going to get double arcs on ships very much. Now, fortunately, with the largest arc being the front, that is also the arc that has the most dice. So usually you're only able to get one really good shot or one big covering fire of anti-squadron shots, and that's kind of where this thing tends to make its money, because while it's usually built strictly as a support carrier, it can also be an anti-squadron carrier. And we're going to look at that in some of the builds, because some of the ways that you can build this really lend themselves towards flak or anti-squadron armament. And having a very, very, very large front arc like this one does, very, very wide front arc, does allow it to hit a lot of squadrons with only a single attack. So that is kind of one of the things the Quasar does like to do with that front arc. Even though it can have 3 dice on an enemy ship at the right ranges, it's sometimes more beneficial for this thing to focus on anti-squadron firepower, because it can throw so much more than 3 dice, depending on the build that you are facing. The Quasar Fire 1 class cruiser carrier is our cheaper version, and what's really amazing about this ship is I think this is probably the best carrier. It's only 54 points, which means it's both cheaper than a Gladiator, cheaper than the Gladiator and cheaper than the Architons as far as the command cruiser. This actually ties the Architon's light cruiser at 54 points, making it just an extreme bargain. It's cheaper than most small ships that the Empire had. Well, most of the small ships plus, which is like the 5 hull small ships. And so this one has 6 hull. It's definitely more survivable than the small ship plus the 5 hull small ships that the Empire has, and of course it's definitely has a lot of different capabilities. Now, it's not as offensive as ships like the Gladiator or the Architons on its own, and of course where the points that you save on the ship are come in, they're going to be lost because you're going to have to spend them on squadrons. But the squadrons tend to be pretty flexible, and this ship really helps you maximize on that. It does have a squadron value of 4. It has only blue dice in all of its arcs, 3 in the front, 2 in the sides, 1 in the rear. Also blue dice in the anti-squadron battery. So this one wants to be at medium range for offensive capability, but a lot of times you want a Quasar Fire 1 to stay well out of shooting range. Or perhaps you take advantage of one of the double offensive retrofits and give it something like disposable capacitors, allowing it to take advantage of those blue dice going at long range, but also allowing it to kind of stay at safe range from enemy shots and still being able to activate 4 squadrons or potentially more. Now, the upgrades on the Quasar Fire 1 are what really propels it into greatness when we're looking at squadrons. Now, 4 squadrons on its own for that price is great. You don't have to put any upgrades at all on this, and it still functions as an effective carrier. Considering most Imperial carriers tend to run 2 or 3, there are some exceptions. Some Imperial Star Destroyers do activate more than that. However, they're also insanely more expensive. So for the price point, and being able to activate 4 squadrons on this is just spectacular. Now, when we look at those upgrades, offensive retrofits have a ton of ways of boosting your squadron capability, both increasing the range from medium to long range, and also increasing the squadron value are both very common uses of the offensive retrofit, and you can put both of those on here if you wanted to. Raising that squadron value to 5 and being able to hit 5 squadrons or 6 with a token at long range is just absolutely incredible, especially because the Empire has such cheap squadrons. You might just do 5 TIE fighters, which is, this also very, very popular build with Sloane as well. So being able to have that many TIE fighters just activate from one ship and being as destructive as they tend to be with Ray Sloane as your commander, the Quasar Fire can really do terrible things. Also, you have the weapons team on here. Now, weapons team is one of those upgrades that tends to work a lot for big gunships because of cards like gunnery teams. However, weapons team also is it's like a split upgrade because half of it's really good for gunships and the other half of it is really good for squadron support. So there are a lot of particular weapons team upgrades that while you aren't going to use it as as a gunship, you can use it as fantastic squadron support and just kind of like a multiplier off of these other two upgrades as well. And of course you do have the officer slot, which every ship has, and of course officers, there's plenty of good officers that are going to work on board a carrier as well, and we'll take a look at some of those. When we spend a little bit more points, we're going to the Quasar Fire 2, which is a real gem, and also a fantastic carrier, but this one has some notable differences. Now, first off, our cost does increase a little bit. We're going up to 61 points on the Quasar Fire 2. A modest increase for what you get. The upgrades are going to change a little bit. You're going to have 2 weapons team and only 1 offensive retrofit, which means you might build this one slightly different. Your emphasis is going to be on the double weapons team or potentially also boarding parties. Again, both versions of the ship can take a boarding party and then still have an upgrade left over, which is something worth thinking about. However, I tend to think of a ship like this as a ship that doesn't ever want to get into close range of enemy ships, so I generally don't recommend putting boarding parties on a Quasar. It is possible if you're spamming Quasars, but I don't think that that's the way they tend to run. That's more of a fringe idea of kind of using Quasars as just bulk ships to throw at your opponent and saying, ha, get through all of this hull. There's a brace in there too, and I've got like 4 of them in this build and then still have points left for the rest of my fleet. Like that, you can do things like that, but this is a ship that wants to be using these for its designed purpose, and that usually involves squadrons. Now, the other thing that makes the Quasar Fire exceptionally different is the fact that it upgrades a lot of its blue dice to red. So for its anti-ship battery armament, we're going to be looking at 2 red and 1 blue in the front, a red and a blue in the sides, and only a blue in the rear. Same shields all the way around. But the biggest change on this one is that anti-squadron die. The anti-squadron battery armament here is red, meaning that you can now hit squadrons in a massive, massive arc. Very, very few ships in the game feature red dice in the squadron battery armament, and that is for a reason, because it is a very effective squadron attack when you're able to do that. You're hitting the full range of the range ruler, and if you make it from the front arc on this ship, don't forget, massive front arc, you're able to hit the area almost the size of a basketball of squadrons from this ship. And now, granted, that may only be 1 red die, and you don't have offensive retrofits, or I'm sorry, you don't have turbo laser upgrades on here to kind of help that, but you do have other things. And so there's a lot you can do. Now, keep in mind, if you're hitting an area that large, your chances of your shots being obstructed are also much larger. So it's not uncommon to say, I can reach this far, but I can only hit half of the squadrons because, again, obstruction makes you lose a die. So if you lose that first die, you're not going to be able to add any extra dice. But for all the shots you can hit, effects that add dice can still work off of that 1 red die. Or also, there's other effects that just deal with the attack itself. It's pretty impressive. And we're going to look at some of those. One of the things I really like to do is Ruthless Strategists on the Quasar Fire 2. It is a weapons team upgrade that doesn't get used a whole lot, but on this ship, especially if you have a lot of TIE fighters, it's a brilliant way to put out tons of damage against ships that are otherwise difficult to damage. Scatter aces and things like that. You can guarantee a damage on everybody that you attack as long as you have another squadron nearby, and that's it's absolutely amazing against some of those tough to kill rebel aces that are out there, like you, Shara Bay. I've got my eye on you. The Quasar Fire 2 has your number. So, I really like the Quasar Fire 2 for its increased offensive capability, especially with that anti-squadron armament. And the role it's going to play is going to be a little bit different with the 2 weapons team. It's going to focus more on the squadron support that comes from weapon teams and a little bit less from the squadron support that comes from offensive retrofit. Now, there are 3 titles that come with the Quasar Fire 2 and the Quasar Fire 1. We're going to look at these in order from cost. So we'll start with the Pursuant. This is a 2-point title. Very, very easy to run this one because 2 points, you can fit that into almost everything. And I love the Pursuant. It's great on a dedicated carrier that's going to want to be doing squadron commands all game. Generally, you want this on a ship that you're going to probably keep safe, because hopefully it will survive long enough for this to matter. But also, it is one that you can risk putting close enough to enemy mechanic shenanigans and things like slicer tools, because it kind of guarantees that you'll be able to activate squadrons at least one extra time. So it says, when you reveal a command other than a squadron command, you may discard this card. To resolve a squadron command, treat this command as if you spent a squadron dial. So it's amazing. If you need to nav, or if you need to engineer, which usually you don't need to engineer, not with an engineering value of only 2, but if you need to nav, you can always pop Pursuant. It gives you that flexibility. Now, it's a command 2 ship, so you're not going to be able to make the decision on the fly, but with command value 2, you can make decisions like that fairly quickly. You're going to know what you're up against. But also, it's really effective against raid tokens, too. If you get a whole bunch of raid tokens, you can always just, potentially plan something else, and then just discard the dial. As long as you revealed something that wasn't a squadron command, you can then potentially, purge all of your raid tokens and pop Pursuant. What you won't be able to do is discard the dial. If it is a squadron command, pop all of your tokens, and then pop Pursuant, because you have to reveal something other than a squadron command. So it's mostly effective against things like slicer tools or Cham Syndulla, or things that change your dials. There is quite a few of those in the game. So so if you're not going up against somebody that has mechanics to change your dials, it gives you the flexibility of being able to plan a navigation kind of in the middle of the game and not lose your ability to do a squadron command. So great little insurance policy against things that are moderately likely to happen. Next up at 3 points, we have the Squall. When you activate, you may choose up to 3 unengaged friendly squadrons at close to medium range. Those squadrons may move up to distance 2. If they do, they cannot end their movement engaged. So Squall is just letting you push squadrons even farther. This is really good with slow squadrons, and this would be one of the great titles if you could use this with the Rebels to help push B-Wings even farther. Now, there are mechanics like this already. You do have upgrades that do this that are neutral, but they tend to be on the support team side, and this ship does not actually have a support team slot. So Squall kind of makes up for that lack of a support team by allowing you to push squadrons a little bit farther than you normally would. And I think it's a pretty nice option. And you just have to be careful not to push the squadrons out of your activation range if you had planned to activate them with this particular activation. So there can be a little bit of a feels bad moment if you were like, oh, good, I've got 4 bombers, I need to go. Oh, let's get them closer. And you push them too far up, and now all of a sudden they're out of range for you to activate. So granted, there's tons of ways to deal with that. You can put an officer on there that lets you do your squadron command after you move, or you can increase the range of your squadron commands. There's lots of different upgrades that are going to play very well with Squall. And then at 5 points, we have the Stronghold title, which is a little more defensive of a title. It says, while a friendly squadron with swarm at distance 1 to 2 is defending, if the attack is treated as obstructed. So this is nice if you want to keep a defensive screen right next to you. For most cases, stuff that's distance 1 to 2 of you will sort of be immune from enemy flak. I say sort of because for every ship that has only 1 dial, they won't be able to make the flak attacks at all because it'll be obstructed. I'm sorry, one die, not dial, 1 die in their battery armament. They're not going to be able to make the shot at all. So the only ships that'll be able to flak against the squadrons that are near you, or be ships that happen to have 2 dice, and of course that would immediately be downgraded to only a single die because of the obstruction. But it also protects against enemy fighters that are trying to come in. If your opponent wanted to kind of do a fighter versus fighter offensive and try to outfighter your TIE fighters that are kind of staying close to the stronghold, of course you're going to make all your shots obstructed, which helps TIE fighters or other nearby ships or even bombers stay alive a little bit longer, because 1 less die against each of them every time they're attacked is going to be really, really nice. I think Stronghold kind of works very well in a moderate squadron build. If you're not necessarily completely maxed on squadrons and you want to just keep a defensive screen, you can kind of keep them near the stronghold. Or if you happen to be in the business of running a Quasar as a flagship, which is not the best flagship, but in some fleets it might, as it is at least a medium ship. If you're not running any medium or large ships outside of the Quasar, if you're running a lot of small ships, or MSU as they call them, multiple small units, the Quasar can be an effective carrier. Although it wouldn't be a small ship, so maybe it's not technically MSU. Maybe it's just lots of SU. But anyway, it can be a carrier in some places, and Stronghold is a good title for that because it just kind of keeps enemy squadrons at bay a little bit, because there's less incentive for enemy squadrons to come near you, especially if you have a screen that will be sticking with this ship, and that screen will be very well defended. So I kind of like Stronghold for those scenarios. Now let's look at a couple of sample builds and ways that you might equip a Quasar. I'll start off with a Quasar Fire 2, a slightly more expensive one, and I wanted to do one without a title first, taking advantage of that red anti-squadron die. For this one, I put Agent Callus on here. Now this one is one that's going to be doing a little bit of squadron shenanigans. Maybe I've got multiple Quasars in this build, or maybe I've got other fleets, or maybe I've only got a few squadrons, and I wanted this guy to be able to activate them. And I'm hoping to take out enemy squadrons with this ship, so that the few squadrons I have can run around unobstructed, or without any problem. Maybe I've just got like maybe 2 TIE fighters and 4 bombers or something like that. And I just want, I want to clear out the enemy ships, the enemy squadrons, and then my bombers can just run rampant. And that's one of the things I want to do. So this is maybe some type of build that might work for that. So we started out with Agent Callus, because again, we'll often run into unique squadrons on the other side, and all those named squadrons, all these unique squadrons, Callus is going to give us an extra die. So now all of a sudden I can roll a red and something else, which is really cool. So I get lots of dice on all the enemy squadrons that are out there. The uniques, I get an extra die. So very, very cool. I also have Ruthless Strategists out there. So if I can toss a TIE fighter out next to some of the enemies that are out there, especially if we've got aces like Shara Bay or Sienna Ree, or any of the scatter aces that are hard to hit, I can do a shot against them. If I miss, no problem. I boom, take a damage with Ruthless Strategists. I also have to take one on my TIE fighter, but my TIE fighter's got 3 health. Right? If I can put 3 damage on an ace at the cost of, doing some mutual damage from Ruthless Strategists onto my own TIE fighters, that's easily worth it. Easily worth it. And I'll be able to make that determination as I see fit. So this is just such a fun card to run with this ship. I also put Veteran Gunners on here just to use the other slot if I wanted to. Let's say I popped Agent Callus and also did a Concentrate Fire when I just like I had to take down that one scatter ace that maybe they already had their scatter spent or something like that. And I rolled 3 dice, and a red and maybe 2 black for Callus and a Concentrate Fire, and they all came up blanks or whatever. I could pop Veteran Gunners and just get an extra shot at that. It's an option. This one you probably wouldn't run as often, but I wanted to change things up a little bit and give you some the idea of a heavy anti-squadron version of a Quasar. This isn't probably the one. This isn't the build you'll probably most likely see, but this is one that's a little bit on the outskirts of what is typical. A little bit more typical, we might see something like the Quasar Fire 1 I have built out here. That is running Strongholds. This is going to want to keep a defensive screen. Now we're going to want to keep this one a little bit farther in the back. With like a heavier squadron build. This one, could be a flagship, or could just be, one of the main carriers of the build. Maybe not the only one, because this is again going to work pretty well in a large heavy squadron build. I did put disposable capacitors on this one, just to kind of show that, like, hey, look, I can get a ship that's not very offensive. All of a sudden, I can get 5 dice on enemy ships, or maybe just the 3. It depends on the arc and the way things are all lined up, but I can do 3 in the front. There were more blue dice, and they were medium range only, but now all of a sudden I'm attacking at long range. Maybe I can soften you up, or maybe I can get some damage through combined with all the squadrons that we're going to activate here, which is always really nice. And so this one is fun. I put flight controllers on this one too, because that's a really, really great weapons team option to put on a ship with a lot of squadron capability. Now, all of a sudden, the 4 squadrons I activate are going to get an extra die when they're attacking enemy squadrons. That's super important, and it's a weapons team. Most of like the Star Destroyers that tend to run, that are also supporting squadrons, they have to really think about, do they want flight controllers, or do they want them, what's probably more valuable to them, maybe gunnery team, right? And now it's a tougher choice now because they each require commands. In original Armada, gunnery team didn't require the concentrate fire command, but now it does. So now it's like, it's a really tough call. So you don't see as many Star Destroyers that are equipping gunnery team also being carriers, because you kind of have to choose. Unless you have Thrawn like double commands or a lot of extra token generation, that just tends to not happen as much. So, but on a ship like this, it's a no-brainer. Flight controllers is an easy, obvious choice, obvious first choice for maybe best in slot for the Quasar Fire 1 on that weapons team. I also put reserve hangar decks on here. This is one of the more newer upgrades, and is going to help you get like a free TIE interceptor back if that happens to die, which is good. And since they have swarm, something that dies too far away from you and then respawns right next to you is also going to benefit with stronghold, because hey, you're wounded and I just launched you again. I resurrected this TIE, but it's okay. You won't die again, because now the shots, if somebody's trying to finish you off a second time, it's going to be obstructed because I spawned you close within the protective bubble of stronghold. And I also have flight commander. This is, again, if we're staying far away, flight commander is going to allow me to kind of stay far away and then eventually move up and then activate. I'll have the option to do my squadron command after I move. I think that one's really, really useful, especially if you don't have the boosted comms and that extra long range. It's a really cool option. So there we go with one sample build. We have another version here with Squall. And this one is doing something a little different. Again, not all of these are typical. I'm saving my favorite build for last. But this one is running rapid launch bays. This one wants to get a little bit closer. Maybe it's going to drop off some bombers at close range. It can drop quite a bit off. And then, of course, maybe it can, if it drops them too soon, maybe it can move some ahead with Squall. Or maybe it's going to push a couple of squadrons ahead with Squall and not worry about if it can activate them or not, because it's planning on dropping some rapid launch bay stuff. But it doesn't want to die before it gets to the fight, right? And so early rounds, maybe it's even doing concentrate fire for the first round or two. Maybe it's going to wait until drop its squadrons until it needs to. It's going to try and clear out squadrons with that flak. But I put Minister Tua on here. This is not a defensible ship. But if we were to, because we have such a huge front arc, I thought, what about early warning system, making the front arc obstructed? And now all of a sudden, like, you almost have to shoot the front arc on this thing. It's got such a massive front arc. Now we can kind of survive a little bit longer, and maybe at least long enough to get close enough with rapid launch bays and be able to drop some ships off. It's a thought, and it allows you to get some slower squadrons into play a little bit faster. And again, we're just making different uses of the ship. Again, not a typical build, but more of a fringe build. Which brings me to something I think is more of a typical build and probably my favorite build out of the bunch. And this is going to be with a Quasar Fire 1. And this is Chironos Quasar Fire. I love Admiral Chirono. He is a 10-point officer. One of the most expensive upgrades in the entire game. But he's worth it, especially on a ship built like this. He's going to let your squadrons move even if they're engaged, which is incredibly deadly. It's a great insurance policy when you have a lot of squadrons and somebody wants to fly a single A-wing right into the middle of them. You can just say, forget the rules. Chironos sending them out there. Now, they're going to go a little slower. You're going to go a little slower, but that's okay. That is absolutely all right. Now, and I love him because he's going to work on every squadron that you activate. And that is particularly interesting because of the fact that you are going to be activating quite a lot of squadrons here. Ideally, with something like this, you probably take a squadron command first and take a token. And with the expanded hangar bay, you're going to have a squadron value of 5. And with the token, you're going to be activating 6 squadrons. So not only that, you have boosted comms. You have extremely long range. Now all of a sudden, you can activate 6 squadrons with this guy, and they all get to move. They don't even care if they're engaged. So you can just activate 6 bombers. But you may not want to activate 6 bombers. You may want to activate a couple of TIE fighters or defenders or something like that, and you can use flight controllers. This one can be good as as your only carrier in some builds, or the only main carrier. You might want to have a couple of Gazantis also to back it up a little bit. But this one is just so deadly because you're maximizing your anti-squadron potential, and then with Chirono you're maximizing everything, but also specifically your bomber potential if they get tied up. And also but because you have so much riding on being able to do that squadron command, this one this is the top choice for Pursuant for me. It gives you that absolute insurance policy that like no, I'm going to be able to pop a squadron when I absolutely need it and make sure that I get my money's worth out of Admiral Chirono. I think this is a fantastic way to run a Quasar Fire 1. Really, really dangerous carrier. If you're facing off on a build kind of like this on the other side, you want to try to prioritize this ship and you want to try to kill it sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, it's going to be able to stay far away from the fight because it has boosted comms, so it doesn't have to stay too close to those squadrons, which means you're gonna have to get through all of those squadrons to get to it, and that can be a dangerous thing, especially when a single A-wing or even two A-wings is not gonna lock those squadrons up because Chirono is there and he's gonna be like, no, they're getting out of there. So you're gonna have to bring a lot of squadrons such that even a speed 2 move from them is not going to get them free and able to target your ships. So you really make this into a very difficult ship for your opponent to deal with when you run it with a build kind of like this. All right, guys, that is my breakdown and look at the Quasar Fire. It is a beautiful carrier for the Empire, and it's my only criticism is that we don't have a version of it for the Rebels just yet. But again, like I said earlier in the video, you can always just proxy it out for the Assault Frigate Mark II and kind of run it in that capacity. They do have similar build potential, not exactly the same. This one is definitely more efficient, but you know they're close enough that I feel like if you want that thematic aspect to be there, especially if you're running A-wings and the Ghost and stuff like that, and you want to do a Star Wars Rebels build, you could probably just do that for your home games. You'll have a great time doing it. All right, guys, that is going to do it for today's video. I want to hear what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments section. Also, jump in our Discord and let's keep the discussion going. I will talk to you all later. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and big thanks to my patrons. You guys are absolutely amazing and help make this channel possible. Thank you for your continued support. I will talk to you later. May the Force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. So say we all. Party on, dudes. And always wash your socks. Goodbye there.